Between 1963 and 1968, the BBC produced 5 seasons of time-travelling adventures. The titular role and infamous monsters have captivated generations for over half a century. However, 97 episodes of the Doctor's early adventures are missing, believed wiped forever. In this series, we explore one of TV's greatest heroes, the history and influences of these lost classics, in Doctor Who Most Wanted. In this episode, we look at the animations of lost Doctor Who episodes, together with exclusive interview footage of Brian Cosgrove. Hello and welcome to Doctor Who Most Wanted. Today I'm joined once again by Brian M. Clark and Gareth Preston. Hello chaps. Coping with lockdown?
Pretty well. It's keeping me busy. In fact, I can't understand people who say they're bored in lockdown because I don't seem to have any spare moments.
No, and I think being a nerd or geek, we haven't really noticed it, have we?
We've been training for this.
Yes.
Today's discussion is animations of lost episodes. Now, the way we used to watch missing episodes, of course, was fan-based recons. But perhaps the best of the recons were done by Loose Cannon Productions. Gareth.
They were quite brilliant productions, and they nicely evolved. Initially, they were straightforward slideshows timed against the music, but as time went by, they became more ambitious, using Photoshop and photos of the set to create a more dynamic sort of slideshow, and sourcing pictures of the actors from other appearances of the same time and photoshopping them in to give a better a better experience. And I remember watching them and thinking, some of these are so polished, I can't understand why the BBC isn't releasing them. So I'm quite glad that is a nice little side effect of the animated reconstructions.
But I'd just like to comment on something Gareth's just said, because what it reminded me of was way back in the time of things being printed on paper. Of course, we had a very early version of animated episodes where there'd be a whole series of screen grabs and dialogue placed next to it. And I think one of the Doctor Who magazines very early on in the 80s used to publish these, kind of have an episode over like five or 6 pages that would just be lots and lots of images from an episode in this. So going to the screen grab animations was a natural step from that in there. So I can see quite a natural evolution that took place, going from paper to these images in the early videos in there. So I find all that very interesting.
The Cosgrove Hall, the invasion, which I actually rewatched this week, knowing that we were going to have in this conversation, because I wanted to see, is it as good as I remember? I've always said it's like the gold standard, and I'm delighted to discover it. It still is. It's still one of the best. I think it's probably what you were saying, Brian, about the perspective. It's some animation can feel very 2D. You can almost kind of see that kind of paper shuffling back and forth.
Hanna-Barbera.
Exactly. Whereas this is beautifully 3-dimensional, and the use of light over it. And you can see all that experience that Cosgrove Hall have when it comes to animation. Really comes to play. Apparently, it happened. It was a happy accident. That the BBC Online had some an unexpected money in the budget, which is how those two episodes came about.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be at an event which was attended by Brian Cosgrove, who gave a fascinating insight as to how Cosgrove Hall started in the animation industry.
We made what I think were some quite iconic films, really, here. All the Danger Mouse films were made here. Count Duckula, the vegetarian vampire duck, he was created here. The Wind in the Willows, the BFG, Roald Dahl's BFG. I had a grand team, well, Mark and I had a grand group of people. Mark, my long-term partner, died a few years ago. He would have loved to have been here. He would have enjoyed thoroughly seeing this. I don't know. Sadness tinged with a great deal of... I'm impressed. I'm impressed with this building. But there is a touch of sadness at the back of it all.
I was watching you when you were watching the Danger Mouse film earlier on. And I have to say, I could notice you were having quite a chortle from time to time. So you still enjoy them as much.
Did you notice I was also cringing occasionally? We got away with an awful lot of nonsense, you know. I really don't know how we got away with it. I mean, some of the animation is very, very simple. I think the good thing about them was we had darn good soundtracks. We had good scripts. We had good actors performing. And we were training animators. This is the thing at the time when we did Danger Mouse. There was no way where we, as a studio, we could hire trained animators. They just weren't here in this country. We had to train them out of art school. So a lot of the animation is quite simplistic, but it worked, you know. I think we left people with fond memories of the shows that we did.
Over the years, there's been various issues of stories which have had one or two missing episodes, which have been animated to fill the gaps. But the techniques and approach of these have differed in style and concept. Gareth?
The one I have a particular issue with is Reign of Terror, which was done by a company called Planet 55. My main issue with it is that it doesn't feel like a Hartnell episode at all. If you watch it, there are so many cuts. Whether this was a technological thing at the time that they could only do like 6 seconds at a time, but across just single lines of dialogue, you can get 3 or 4 cuts, and it's usually real close-ups. It's eyes, mouth, nose, face.
Many of the Hartnell episodes were actually filmed in wide shots and mid shots in there. We didn't have all that many of, and in long shots, you know, 2-3 minute takes in there. So you're right, having these inserts, these jump cuts in there to faces and mouths, it sounds very modern.
I must agree, it doesn't feel in keeping with the period. However, in the same year, a company named Quirius produced 2 episodes of The Ice Warriors, which was more sympathetic to the original broadcast and matched almost the telesnaps. Another example is, of course, although strictly speaking not a missing episode, is Sharda, which has enjoyed several reissues. Gareth, I wonder, is there another version of Sharda to be made, I wonder?
I don't know if there's any room for it. I mean, I'm saying that until deep fake technology becomes available on our laptops, and then I've no doubt fans at least will have a go. But I think it's also because Sharda always sounds really epic. Before you start, it sits in your mind. You've got huge Time Lord prisons, these rumored cameos from old monsters coming in. I must admit, that was something that disappointed me in the recent, although I did enjoy the animated version. I was a little disappointed that when it came to all the prisoners being released from the cells, they were a rather anonymous collection of humanoids rather than the rumored Zygon, Wirrin, Sontarans that apparently were. The rumor was that they were going to be amongst the prisoners on Sharda. I think it's an epic type story, and it's by Douglas Adams. I think that's two factors that's why people keep being drawn to remaking it all the time. It's very tantalizing, the fact that it's almost there. It feels like it's almost there because we've got at least half of it on video. So I think that's what keeps attracting. I remember watching the very first reconstruction, which was just fans kind of sitting in somebody's front room reading the script, sort of like to camera.
You can rest here until morning. Who the hell is he? Ian. Ian Chesterton. Dorovac here? I suspect so. Dorovac? A scientist. That Dalek we saw. It's not the one I'm familiar with. How would you know? Because it's not, that's why. Tell us then, Ian. Tell us something we don't know. Okay. They feed on static electricity. Wrong. Power supplies took the first hit. They come from Skaro. Skaro? Yes, I've been there. I helped defeat them with the Falls. Falls? Skaro? A loony. It's the truth. Look, everyone comes up with these crazy theories and ideas. All right. Inside those polycarbonate cases is a living creature, the likes of which is something from the stuff of nightmares. And I've seen them. Keep an eye on him. Remember, he's your responsibility. You don't believe me, do you? I want to, but no. Look, you seem a good guy, Ian. What's left of humanity is basically the scum. The Daleks don't need to try too hard. We're killing each other off quite easily. It's the world at its lowest ebb. You can block some things. Daleks experiment on anyone, young, old. And children, it was worse. The chemicals they gave them reacted badly. Then, when it didn't work, they discarded them and let them die. I hate them. It's what drives me to face another day. Understand? So when I say I don't believe your stories, I came here with two other people, Barbara and the Doctor. If anyone can defeat them, he will.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, Brian, because the Macra Terror was revamped, given a far more futuristic style and tone.
And obviously, there's two ways to go here. There's one, recreating history. So you make it as much like the original episode as you can. You try and reflect all those screenshots, all those camera directions, and you try and make it as if it was the original. Or you can take the soundtrack and do your own interpretation of it.
And prominently, the Macra themselves have more on-screen menace than its, help me out, so Gareth, 1967?
1967, yes, that sounds right.
Broadcast. Ironically, The Power of the Daleks, which got a full animation back in 2019, has been reissued again as a special edition.
I think it is an improvement. I've got both versions. I think the opening scene is a lot more fluid. The Troughton's first scene in the TARDIS, that's been redone. It feels very. If you compare the two, it feels that it's kind of been redone from the ground up, and it's a lot better. And the scene that's really improved is the famous Dalek production line at the end of episode 4, which now they've got that extra bit of footage of Lesterton watching what's going on and incorporated that. That's another good improvement to it. So I think it is worth it. Yes, I think it was worth revisiting. I would say Power of the Daleks. It's an interesting question about how far you go. I think generally, my level is, especially when it's a story that otherwise doesn't exist, I think that you do have, a bit more freedom, a bit more leeway with the animation, especially since these DVDs are coming with a nice telesnap reconstruction as well. So if you want the more authentic looking black and white and shot in that very, as you say, medium range sort of direction, then yes, you've got the telesnaps, and I think you should be free to go a bit further with both. I mean, the Macra has a bit of a 2000 AD kind of look to it in its design now, and certainly in Fury from the Deep, which has introduced a North Sea full of flailing tendrils in episode 6, is a great idea, because the alternative, as the telesnaps bear out, would have been nearly 5 minutes of animated Troughton gurning and a helicopter flying about.
And my perspective of the Power of the Daleks is that on occasions the animation doesn't always convey empathy. And I'm thinking especially about episode 6, when the colony has been exterminated by the Daleks. Do you think this is something generic of animation as a whole?
Basically, it comes down to our old friends of time and money, because some of Pixar films have made me cry. Because that's.
Oh, come on, Gareth! Which ones? Come on.
I think definitely Up. The first 5 minutes of Up.
Yeah.
If you've not seen Up, I won't spoil it for you. But the montage of showing how this character has become the old man that he is, and you follow him from boyhood, and he's meeting his wife. It really gets you. That
I'd also mention the work by Studio Ghibli, that a lot of the Japanese anime can pack a very powerful punch. The Fireflies one about the dropping of the atomic bomb, it's a lot of it silent, and they just get across so much of the aftermath of the bomb in pure animation. I think it's so powerful. You raise a good question there about scene transitions, because early on, especially the Hartnell Troughton years, a scene would end and the camera would stay on the actor's face as you tried to do some kind of emoting, not for any story reason, but to allow the actors to get to the other part of the studio so they could carry on filming there, because they filmed almost as live in those days. So there is a question of whether those same scene transitions are still required when you animate the episode, because you don't need them for the technical reason the floor manager had way back when.
Well, we have had some small examples of that. And Sharda, when it was reconstructed, they decided to do it as a feature length rather than in 6 episodes because it is quite a padded story, and they did make some cuts to speed it up a bit. And I think that was the right decision in that case. It always comes down to it's a real case by case basis. The talent. I mean, going back to Power of the Daleks, if they do it in an emotive, stylish way, I've got no problem with it. If they CGI'd in a sad looking dog, sort of like looking at exterminated bodies, then I'd say that's going too far.
Or if they cut to the teddy bear
that they're holding.
You know all the tricks, Mr. Clark.
Drop the dead donkey.
Yeah, it's like I was thinking that with the invasion actually is a good example. That's an interesting one because you've got these 2 episodes and they're trying to really need to match them with the 6 existing episodes. But the end of episode 4, where the Cyberman is revived, is interesting because you get to see that scene both ways. And in the animated version, it's flashing lights. You see the light reflected in the glasses of the scientist as the Cyberman is being revived, and it's very noir. And then you go to the live action, and it's basically just a medium shot of the Cyberman in a reasonably lit cellar coming out of the bank. It's still effective, but it's not quite as dramatic as the animators made it look.
So what's next? As we know, episode 3 of The Web of Fear is to be animated in a special edition for summer 2021. And then who knows? Gareth, any predictions as to what may be next?
Weirdly, I think actually the Space Pirates would be a good choice. And again, because so little of it, well, 1 episode exists, but I think with that one, I would give the animators their head in when it comes to swooping spaceships and futuristic interiors and similar, and hopefully they could that story. It's, to be honest, it's that, although I think they would feel honor bound to kind of stick with the recordings to some extent, it's certainly a story that could do with a bit of judicious editing in it.
Control reports that the V-ship's on an approach path.
All ready? All right, listen. We can't afford to wait for Clancy. Take that ship up. Activate the overriding unit. Now. You understand, Dervish? Boost that crate into orbit. Immediately.
I don't understand what's happened to them. I'm going back.
Well, don't be long. And tell them to hurry up. Well, heck. That's the rocket drive. We're taking off. The Doctor will be burned to a frazzle in the blast.
But if you're going to spend that much money recreating those stories, you've got to decide, is your market the 15-year-old or is it the 55-year-old in there? And that will decide what style of animation you're going to go for.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, I think it's making a choice and stick to it. I suspect it's closer to the 55s than the 15-year-olds, but I think it comes down a bit to technology. I think as animation becomes cheaper and more accessible, then it's more and more likely that Hartnell stories are going to get adapted. One of the big problems, apparently, some of the animators who've been asked this in the past have said the trouble with Hartnell historicals is that they often have a lot of locations in them, and often they have quite large casts as well. So all that is quite expensive in terms of creating the models and the sets in animation. So I think that's one of the reasons. But in time, the one I would definitely love to see is the Massacre, which I actually watched the loose canon of that a few months ago, and it's really gripping stuff. It's a pretty tough story, really,
Yes.
for a Hartnell, and so yeah, that would be my choice.
And for you, Brian, is there anything that stands out? Fewer historicals in the Troughton period?
The
Or...
problem with the historicals, there's a lot of talking heads, and they're almost radio in places, except when someone needs to observe somebody from behind a curtain or leave a message on a pillow or similar action. They're pretty early 1960s costume Sunday afternoon drama affairs. And what Gareth says is right. They don't have the sci-fi buzz. They don't have the monsters or the hidden technology or the plan by some ancient race trying to conquer mankind. They do tend to stay in their period and reflect the period.
And then we come to the Underwater Menace, a story which has divided fans for a long time, Gareth.
It's not a great story, I have to say, sadly. I mean, I enjoy it, but it's a story with problems. I'm being careful how I say this because I don't want to libel. I believe that the DVD makers themselves wanted a proper kind of loose cannon style one, and unfortunately that slideshow was forced on them by management from above, sort of like. But that's what I've heard anyway, allegedly, as they say. But it is a pity. I mean, I'm glad, considering at one point we weren't even going to get an Underwater Menace release at all, and that episode 2 was going to remain the tantalizing odd one out. So I'm glad it got released. No, it's not a great story. It's full of illogical stuff. It's full of interesting stuff because it's Troughton really early on. He's still finding his way in it. And it's nice to have a story with a fair amount of Ben in it as well, who's sadly been rather shortchanged by the missing episodes. So I have a feeling it would be nice that when season for the collection comes out, hopefully it'll get a revisit.
Yes, yeah. There's another generation of animation coming along, which is going to be the 3D visors, isn't it? Where you'll have augmented reality sitting in front of your eyes, and you step into the story. So all these things can start over again.
That's how Sharda. That's the next version of Sharda.
Sadly, we must once again go our separate ways into time and space. My thanks to Brian and Gareth for their insight into the animations of Lost Doctor Who. Until next time, bye for now.